Hello friends, did you know that nearly 85% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Comments. Sheriff Rachel Martinez had been serving Blackwater County, Texas for 12 years, but she'd never received a call quite like the one that came through at exactly 11:47 p.m. on September 15, 2019. The voice on the other end was calm, almost conversational, which made the words even more chilling. Sheriff Martinez, I'm calling to report a murder that's going to happen in exactly 13 minutes. Martinez sat up straighter at her desk, reaching for her pen. Sir, can you repeat that? Did you say a murder that's going to happen? That's correct. At midnight tonight, a woman named Sarah Chen will be killed at 1247 Oakwood Drive. I suggest you hurry. The line went dead. Martinez stared at the phone for a moment before springing into action. She knew Oakwood Drive, a quiet residential street on the east side of town. More concerning, she knew Sarah Chen. The 34-year-old elementary school teacher lived alone after her divorce 6 months ago. Martinez had responded to a domestic disturbance call there during the proceedings. As she raced through the empty streets, Martinez radioed for backup and tried calling Sarah's number. No answer. The digital clock on her dashboard read 11:53 p.m. when she pulled into the driveway of 1247 Oakwood Drive. The house was dark except for a single light in what she knew was the kitchen window. Martinez approached the front door cautiously, her hand resting on her service weapon. She knocked firmly. Sarah, it's Sheriff Martinez. I need you to come to the door. No response. She tried the handle, locked. Moving around to the back of the house, she found the kitchen door standing open, which immediately set off alarm bells. Sarah was meticulous about security after her divorce. Sarah, Martinez called as she entered the kitchen, flashlight drawn. The house felt wrong somehow, too quiet and filled with an odd metallic smell. As she moved through the first floor, everything appeared normal until she reached the living room. There, sitting on the coffee table, was Sarah's cell phone. Next to it was a piece of paper with Martinez's name written on it. The sheriff's radio crackled to life at exactly midnight. Sheriff, we have a situation. Sarah Chen's car was just found in the river off Highway 9. Looks like she's been in there for hours. Martinez felt ice form in her stomach. If Sarah was already dead when the call came in, who had made the prediction? And why was her phone here, in the house? She carefully picked up the note with her name on it. Written beneath in different handwriting were the words, "You're too late for this one, but there's still time for the next. Check your voicemail." With trembling fingers, Martinez accessed her voicemail. One new message time-stamped 11:59 p. Tememus Sheriff Martinez, this is Sarah Chen. I need to warn you about something terrible. I think someone's been watching me, following me. I found these photos under my car windshield wiper yesterday. Pictures of me at work, at the grocery store, in my house. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is in one of the photos, there's someone standing behind me that I never saw. Someone in a police uniform. The message continued. I was too, scared to call because I don't know who to trust. If something happens to me, look for the photos. I hid them somewhere safe. And Sheriff, be careful. I think whoever's doing this might be someone you know. Martinez's blood ran cold. Someone in law enforcement was involved. She immediately called for a crime scene team while searching the house for the photos Sarah mentioned. In the bedroom, behind a loose baseboard, she found an envelope containing 12 photographs. Each showed Sarah going about her daily life, unaware she was being stalked. In 5 of the photos, a figure in a sheriff's department uniform could be seen in the background, always partially obscured, but clearly watching her. The uniform details were too blurry to identify which department, but something about the figure's posture seemed familiar. Martinez photographed each image with her phone before securing them as evidence. As she worked, her radio crackled again. Sheriff, there's been a development with the car. It wasn't an accident. The vehicle was pushed into the water. We are treating this as a homicide. Over the next 3 days, the investigation consumed Martinez's every waking moment. The autopsy revealed Sarah had been struck in the head before her car went into the water. Security cameras from businesses along Highway 9 captured footage of a sheriff's department vehicle near the scene around 1000 p.m. the night Sarah died, an hour before the anonymous call. But the license plate was obscured, and none of Martinez's officers were scheduled for patrol in that area. The break came when Martinez reviewed the department's communication logs. The anonymous call had come from a burner phone, but cell tower data showed it had been made from within the sheriff's department building. Someone with access to the station had made that call. The implications were staggering. A member of her own team was not only involved in Sarah's murder, but had called it in like some sick game. Martinez began a careful internal investigation, reviewing each of her officers' schedules and whereabouts. Deputy Jake Morrison had called in sick that evening, but his GPS patrol unit showed movement. Deputy Lisa Freeman had finished her shift early due to a family emergency, but couldn't provide details when questioned. Most troubling was Deputy Mark Patterson, who had been present in the building when the call came in, but had no official duties that required him to be there. The killer's next move came exactly 1 week later. Another call at 11:47 p.m. Sheriff Martinez, I hope you enjoyed our first game. The second victim will be Robert Hayes, 45 Elm Street, in exactly 13 minutes. This time, try to arrive before I do. Martinez's hands shook as she recognized the name. Robert Hayes was a witness in a domestic violence case she'd prosecuted 2 years ago. He'd provided testimony that helped convict an abuser who happened to be married to Deputy Patterson's sister. The connections were becoming clear, but she needed proof. Instead of rushing to Elm Street, Martinez made a calculated decision. She placed surveillance on Deputy Patterson while sending other units to Hayes' address. Her gamble paid off. Patterson was observed leaving his apartment at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the call, heading toward Elm Street in his personal vehicle. When backup units arrived at Hayes' house, they found Patterson's patrol car parked around the corner and Patterson himself attempting to break into the residence. The arrest was swift, but Patterson's confession revealed the true horror of what had been happening. He'd been killing people he blamed for ruining his family's life. Sarah Chen for her testimony in his sister's divorce proceedings, and Hayes for his domestic violence testimony. But the most chilling revelation was that he'd been planning these murders for months, studying his victims' routines and photographing them to increase their terror before he struck. I wanted you to feel helpless, Patterson told Martinez during interrogation. I wanted you to know something bad was going to happen and not be able to stop it, just like how I felt when my sister's life was destroyed by people like them. The investigation revealed Patterson had been using his access to case files to identify people he blamed for various family misfortunes going back years. Police found a detailed list in his apartment with 17 names. Sarah and Robert were just the beginning. Most disturbing of all were the surveillance photos he'd taken of Martinez herself, suggesting she might have eventually become a target for being the sheriff who would ultimately stop him. Patterson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The case exposed serious security flaws in the department that Martinez worked tirelessly to address. She implemented new protocols for evidence access, required buddy system patrols, and established psychological evaluations for all officers. But the case left lasting scars on Martinez in the community. The trust between law enforcement and residents had been shattered by the revelation that a deputy had been stalking and murdering innocent people. Martinez often wondered how many other victims there might have been if Patterson hadn't chosen to play his twisted game of calling in his own crimes. To this day, Martinez can't hear a phone ring late at night without feeling a surge of anxiety. The Midnight Caller case taught her that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from the criminals police are sworn to catch, but from the darkness that can lurk within the badge itself. She retired in 2023, but still wakes up sometimes at 11:47, p.m., checking her phone for missed calls and praying she'll never again hear a voice calmly predicting murder in exactly 13 minutes. The case remains a cautionary tale taught in police meets across the country about the importance of psychological screening and internal oversight. But for those who lived through it in Blackwater County, it serves as a reminder that evil can wear a uniform and that the line between protector and predator can be terrifyingly thin. Music Sheriff David Thompson had always prided himself on his rational approach to law enforcement. In his 14 years serving Madison County, Ohio, he'd built a reputation as a methodical investigator who solved cases through careful evidence gathering and logical deduction. He didn't believe in ghost stories, urban legends, or anything that couldn't be explained by science and common sense. That skepticism would be severely tested during the winter of 2016, when a routine noise complaint would lead him into a nightmare that defied every rational explanation he'd ever relied upon. The call came in on January 23rd at 2:30 a.m. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, an 82-year-old widow living on Riverside Drive, reported hearing voices and screaming coming from the abandoned Hillrest Elementary School that had been closed since 2008. Thompson had responded to similar calls from Mrs. Vance before, usually false alarms triggered by wind, animals, or her medication side effects. But protocol was protocol, and he drove out to investigate. Hillrest Elementary sat on 12 acres of overgrown property at the edge of town. The two-story brick building had been abandoned after budget cuts forced the district to consolidate schools. Windows were boarded up and the playground equipment had been removed, leaving only concrete slabs and rusted swing set frames. As Thompson approached the building, he noticed his radio beginning to emit strange static, unusual but not unprecedented in areas with old electrical systems. Walking the perimeter, Thompson found no signs of forced entry or vandalism. The building appeared as empty and lifeless as it had for the past 8 years. He was about to return to his patrol car when he heard something that made him freeze. The faint sound of children singing. The melody was familiar. Ring Around the Rosie. But it seemed to be coming from inside the supposedly empty school. Thompson tried his radio to call for backup, but the static had grown so intense that no communication was possible. Drawing his flashlight and service weapon, he found a side door where the lock had been broken years ago by previous trespassers. The door opened with a prolonged creak that echoed through empty hallways. Inside, the school felt colder than the sea. January night outside. Thompson's breath came out in visible puffs as he moved through corridors lined with empty lockers and abandoned classrooms. The singing had stopped, but now he could hear other sounds. The squeak of sneakers on linoleum, the slam of locker doors, and the general murmur of voices that might be expected in a functioning school. Except this school had been empty for nearly a decade. Following the sounds, Thompson made his way to what had been the main hallway. His flashlight beam revealed something that made no sense. The hallway appeared to stretch much farther than the building's actual dimensions should have allowed. Classrooms lined both sides, and through their windows he could see dim lights flickering as if the electricity had been restored. But when he'd circled the building outside, it had been completely dark. The sounds were getting louder now, definitely children's voices, but with an odd quality that Thompson couldn't identify. They seemed to echo strangely, as if coming from a great distance despite originating from the classrooms right next to him. He approached the nearest classroom door and tried the handle. Locked, but through the window he could see small figures moving around inside. "Police!" Thompson called out. "Is anyone in there?" The movement inside the classroom stopped immediately and the hallway fell silent. Then slowly, one of the figures approached the window. What Thompson saw made his blood freeze. It was a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. But there was something terribly wrong with her appearance. Her skin was pale gray, her clothes were outdated by decades, and her eyes reflected his flashlight beam with an unnatural luminescence. The child placed her hand against the window and mouthed words Thompson couldn't understand. Behind her, other small figures began to gather, all with the same greyish paler and eerily reflective eyes. They pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in unison, trying to communicate something urgent. Thompson backed away from the window, his rational mind struggling to process what he was seeing. These couldn't be real children. No one had reported any missing kids, and the building had been sealed for years. But the alternative explanation was even more disturbing. As he retreated down the hallway, every classroom window began to fill with the same pale figures, all trying desperately to get his attention. His radio suddenly crackled to life, but instead of dispatch, he heard a child's voice. "Mister, you have to help us. We can't leave. We've been here so long." The voice was filled with fear and desperation, overlaid with that same strange, echoing quality he'd noticed earlier. "Who is this?" Thompson demanded. "How are you using this frequency?" "We're trapped," the voice continued. "Something bad happened here. We need someone to remember us, to find us. Please don't leave us here." Thompson's training kicked in despite the impossible circumstances. If children were somehow trapped in this building, he had a duty to help them. "Where are you? How many?" "Of you are there, room 13, the voice replied, "but be careful. He's still here too, the man who hurt us. He doesn't want anyone to find out what he did." Room 13. Thompson remembered that room number from his school days. It had been notorious among local kids because most buildings didn't have a 13th room, due to superstition. But Hillrest had bucked that tradition. Room 13 was located on the second floor, a storage room that had been used for art supplies. As Thompson climbed the stairs to the second floor, the sounds around him intensified. He could hear children crying, the scrape of desks being moved, and underneath it all, heavy adult footsteps that seemed to be following him. The hallway upstairs was even colder, and his flashlight beam began to flicker, as if the battery was dying, though it had been fresh when his shift started. Room 13 was at the end of the hallway. Unlike the other doors, this one stood slightly ajar. As Thompson approached, the children's voices on his radio became more urgent. "Hurry, mister. He knows you're here. He's coming." Thompson pushed open the door to room 13 and swept his flashlight across the interior. The room was larger than it should have been, filled with old desks and chairs arranged in rows. At each desk sat a child, all with the same greyish paler and luminous eyes he'd observed through the windows. They were looking at him expectantly, hopefully, as if he was their salvation. "You can see us," one child whispered, her voice echoing, both in the room and through his radio. "Finally, someone can see us. How many of you are there?" Thompson asked, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to living children or something else entirely. 23, the child replied. "We were here for after-school art class on May 15th, 1987. Mr. Ricks locked the doors and turned on the gas. He said we were being too loud, causing too much trouble. He said he was going to teach us to be quiet forever." Thompson's blood ran cold. He vaguely remembered hearing about a tragedy at Hillrest Elementary from his childhood, but the details had been suppressed due to the nature of the crime. A teacher had killed a classroom full of children before taking his own life. The school had reopened after extensive renovations, but had never been the same. Parents pulled their children out. Enrollment dropped, and eventually the building was closed altogether. "Mr. Ricks is still here," another child warned. "He doesn't like it when people come looking for us. He gets angry." As if summoned by the child's words, Thompson heard heavy footsteps in the hallway behind him, accompanied by a man's voice. Children should be seen and not heard. This is detention for all of you. Thompson spun around to see a tall figure in the doorway. A man in his 50s wearing outdated clothing and thick glasses. His face was contorted with rage, and in his hand he held what appeared to be a large wrench. But like the children, there was something fundamentally wrong with his appearance. He seemed to flicker in and out of focus, as if he wasn't entirely present in the same reality as Thompson. "You don't belong here," the figure of Hendrik said, his voice carrying that same echoing quality. "These children are in my care. They need to learn discipline." Thompson drew his weapon, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever this thing was. "You're dead," he said. "You died 30 years ago." "Death is just another classroom," Chris replied, moving closer. "And you're disrupting my lesson." The children in the room began to chant in unison. "Help us, mister. He won't let us go. We've been here so long." Their voices grew louder and more desperate as Fricks advanced on Thompson. Suddenly, Thompson's radio came alive with multiple voices. Not just the children in room 13, but dozens of others. "Run," they warned. "Get out while you can. Tell people what happened to us. Make them remember." Thompson didn't need to be told twice. He bolted from the room as Fricks lunged at him with the wrench. The impact never came, but Thompson could feel the displaced air as the weapon passed through the space where he'd been standing. He ran down the hallway as the entire building seemed to come alive around him. Classroom doors slamming, lockers rattling, and the voices of children pleading for help echoing from every direction. He burst through the side door he'd entered and ran to his patrol car, not stopping until he was a 4-mile down the road. Only then did he pull over and try to process what had happened. His radio had returned to normal, showing no trace of the voices he'd heard. His flashlight was working perfectly. By all objective measures, nothing unusual had occurred, but Thompson knew what he'd experienced was real, even if he couldn't explain it. The next morning, he began researching the 1987 incident at Hillrest Elementary. What he found confirmed the children's story. Harold Hendris, a third-grade teacher with a history of mental health issues, had trapped 23 children in an art storage room during after-school care and released gas from a faulty heater, killing them all before taking his own life. The tragedy had been one of the worst school massacres in Ohio history, but media coverage had been limited due to the victims' young ages and the sensitive nature of the crime. The school district had suppressed many details, renovated the building extensively, and eventually tried to move on. But the families of the victims never forgot, and many had fought for years to have a proper memorial erected. Thompson spent the following weeks contacting surviving family members and researching the case files. He learned that room 13 had indeed been where the murders occurred, though it had been renumbered and converted to a regular classroom after the renovations. The building's closure in 2008 had been attributed to budget constraints. But Thompson discovered that maintenance workers and security guards had reported strange occurrences for years: voices in empty hallways, children's laughter after hours, and equipment malfunctions in certain areas of the building. Armed with this information, Thompson presented his findings to the county commissioners and school board. He didn't mention his supernatural encounter, instead focusing on the historical significance of the site and the need for a proper memorial. His efforts were successful. The building was designated as a historical site, and a memorial garden was created to honor the 23 children who died there. The night before the memorial dedication, Thompson returned to Hillrest Elementary one final time. As he approached the building, his radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Thank you, mister. We can go home now." The building stood silent and empty, but for the first time since his encounter, it felt peaceful rather than ominous. Thompson never experienced anything supernatural at Hillrest again, but the case changed his perspective on the unexplained. He learned that sometimes the dead need advocates among the living, and that justice doesn't always end with earthly punishment. The voices he heard that night were real, even if they existed in a realm beyond normal understanding. In 2020, Thompson retired from law enforcement and became a volunteer coordinator for the Hillrest Memorial Foundation, ensuring that the 23 children who died there would never be forgotten again. He keeps his old radio in his office, though, It only picks up normal police frequencies now. But sometimes late at night when he's working alone, he thinks he can hear the faint echo of children's laughter. Not the desperate pleas for help he heard that terrifying night, but the joyful sounds of kids finally free to play again. Sheriff Amanda Cross thought she'd seen everything during her 8 years in law enforcement, but Millfield County, Vermont, had proven to be a quiet assignment since her transfer from the big city. The rural county's biggest crimes were usually domestic disputes and the occasional DUI, which is why the events that began on October 13th, 2020, shattered her understanding of both her job and reality itself. It started with what seemed like a simple wellness check, but would evolve into a nightmare that questioned everything she believed about the nature of evil. The call came in at 9:15 p.m. from Margaret Holloway, a 67-year-old retired librarian who lived alone on Maplewood Road. Margaret was known for her punctuality and routine. She called her sister in Burlington every Tuesday evening at exactly 8:00 p.m. When she'd missed 2 consecutive calls without explanation, her sister had driven down to check on her. Finding Margaret's house dark with newspapers piling up in the driveway, she'd contacted the sheriff's department. Cross arrived at 1847 Maplewood Road to find a neat colonial house sitting on 2 acres of well-maintained property. Margaret's car was in the driveway and all the doors were locked. Peering through windows revealed nothing unusual. The house appeared lived in and normal with no signs of struggle or disturbance. Cross knocked loudly and called out before using the spare key Margaret's sister had provided. "Mrs. Holloway, Sheriff's Department, I'm here to check on you," Cross announced as she entered the front hallway. The house was quiet, but felt oddly warm despite the October chill outside. She moved through the first floor methodically. Living room, kitchen, dining room, all normal. Margaret's purse sat on the kitchen counter, her car keys in a bowl by the front door. Nothing suggested she'd left voluntarily. Upstairs, Cross found Margaret's bedroom door closed. She knocked gently before opening it. Mrs. Holloway. The room was empty, bed unmade, reading glasses on the nightstand next to an open book. But what caught Cross's attention was the closet door, which stood slightly ajar with what appeared to be clothing scattered on the floor inside. Cross approached the closet carefully, drawing her flashlight. The scattered items were indeed clothes, but they were arranged in an odd pattern around what looked like a hole in the closet floor. The opening was roughly 3 feet in diameter, with wooden planks appearing to have been carefully removed and set aside. Cross peered down into the hole with her flashlight and saw what appeared to be a ladder descending into darkness. "Mrs. Holloway," Cross called down the opening. Her voice echoed strangely, suggesting a larger space below than should exist under a residential house. Getting no response, Cross rayed for backup and requested a technical rescue team, though she couldn't explain why without sounding insane. A hole in a bedroom closet leading to an unknown underground space wasn't exactly standard procedure. While waiting for backup, Cross continued searching the house and found Margaret's computer still logged into her email account. The last message she'd sent was to her sister on Tuesday morning, mentioning that she'd been hearing scratching sounds in the walls and planned to call an exterminator. But there were no scheduled service calls on her calendar and no signs that any work had been done. Backup arrived 40 minutes later in the form of Deputy Martinez and 2 volunteer firefighters trained in confined space rescue. Cross explained the situation and the team assembled at the closet opening. Deputy Martinez went down first, reporting that the ladder led to a tunnel approximately 8 feet down that appeared to extend horizontally in both directions. Sheriff Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. "You need to see this. It's not just a tunnel. It's a whole network down here, and there's evidence someone's been using it recently." Cross descended the ladder into what proved to be an elaborate underground system. The tunnels were roughly carved but structurally sound, about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, with wooden support beams every few yards. Battery-powered LED lights had been strung along the ceiling, providing dim illumination as far as she could see in both directions. "How is this possible?" Cross asked Martinez. "There's no record of any underground construction on this property." "It gets stranger," Martinez replied, leading her to the left along one tunnel branch. "Look at this." They emerged to a larger chamber carved out of the earth, approximately 12 feet square. with a ceiling high enough to stand in comfortably. The space contained camping equipment, canned food, water containers, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. Multiple monitors showed feeds from cameras positioned around Margaret Holloway's house and several other houses in the area. Someone's been living down here, Cross realized, studying the setup and watching multiple properties. She examined the camera feeds more closely and recognized several of the houses as belonging to elderly residents living alone in the rural area. Martinez, we need to call this in to the state police immediately. This isn't just a missing person case anymore. As they prepared to leave the chamber and secure the scene, Cross heard something that made her blood freeze, a woman's voice calling for help, faint but distinct, coming from deeper in the tunnel system. Both officers looked at each other. The voice was definitely Margaret Holloway's. "Ma'am, where are you?" Cross called back. "This is Sheriff Cross. We're here to help you." "Help me," came the weak reply. "Please, I can't. I've been down here for days." Following the voice, Cross and Martinez moved deeper into the tunnel system, which proved to be far more extensive than either had imagined. The main tunnel branched into multiple passages, some leading to dead ends, others connecting to chambers similar to the surveillance room they'd found. The construction was clearly the work of years, not months. They found Margaret Holloway in a chamber about 100 yards from the entrance. She was alive but weak, sitting against the wall with her hands zip-tied behind her back and her ankles bound. Her face was bruised and she appeared dehydrated and disoriented. "Mrs. Holloway, we're going to get you out of here," Cross said, working to cut her restraints. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "He's coming back," Margaret whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "He said he was going to move me tonight. Said I'd seen too much." "Who?" Cross asked. "Who did this to you?" "I don't know his name, but I've seen him before around the neighborhood. He's been watching us for a long time. He knows everything about us, our routines when we're alone, when we sleep." Martinez was checking the rest of the chamber when he called out urgently, "Sheriff, you need to see this." On a makeshift table were detailed maps of the entire area, showing not just the tunnel system, but what appeared to be entry points into at least 8 different houses. Next to the maps were surveillance photos of elderly residents, detailed schedules of their daily activities, and what looked like a ranking system with some names circled in red. This is a predator operation, Cross realized. He's been stalking multiple victims, learning their patterns. She studied the photos and recognized several faces, residents she'd done welfare checks on over the past year. All elderly, all living, alone, all trusting members of the community. Margaret's voice interrupted her thoughts. "There's more. In the back chamber, he showed me. He showed me what he did to the others." Cross felt her stomach drop. "Others?" "Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street. Disappeared 6 months ago. Everyone thought she moved to live with her daughter. But she's down here and there are others." The discovery of what the perpetrator called his trophy room would haunt Cross for the rest of her career. In the deepest chamber of the tunnel complex, they found evidence of at least 4 elderly residents who had supposedly moved away or died of natural causes over the past 2 years. Personal effects, identification, and worse. A detailed journal documenting how the killer had stalked, abducted, and murdered each victim. The tunnel system connected to 8 different houses in a 3-meter radius, all occupied by elderly residents living alone. The killer had spent years carefully excavating the network, timing his work to avoid detection, and using it to observe his victims' daily routines through hidden cameras and listening devices. When he was ready to strike, he would enter through basement access points he'd created, usually during night hours when his victims were asleep. As the investigation unfolded over the following weeks, the scope of the operation became clear. The killer was identified as Robert Bobby Walsh, a 34-year-old handyman who had performed work for many of the victims over the years, gaining their trust and access to their homes. He'd used these opportunities to install surveillance equipment and identify the best entry points for his tunnel system. Walsh had been living in the underground complex for over 3 years, surviving on food stolen from his victims and maintaining an elaborate surveillance network that allowed him to monitor their activities around the clock. His journal revealed a disturbing progression from simple voyeurism to theft to eventual murder. With each crime escalating in brutality, the case broke open when state police, following leads from the tunnel system, tracked Walsh to a storage facility where he'd been disposing of his victims' remains. He was arrested while attempting to access the tunnels through an entrance in the basement of another targeted house. The homeowner, 72-year-old Arthur Mills, had been scheduled to be Walsh's next victim. During interrogation, Walsh showed no remorse for his crimes, describing his victims as practice for what he called his final project, a plan to abduct and hold multiple victims simultaneously in a larger underground facility he'd been constructing in a remote wooded area. Investigation of this secondary site revealed the beginnings of what could only be described as an underground prison designed to hold up to a dozen people. Walsh was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of kidnapping, stalking and burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, but the case left lasting scars on the Millfield County community. The discovery that a trusted handyman had been living beneath their homes for years, watching their every move and planning their deaths, shattered the sense of safety that small, rural communities depend on. Cross worked with state authorities to ensure all tunnel entrances were sealed and the entire underground network was filled with concrete. Security systems were installed in the homes of elderly residents at county expense, and a neighborhood watch program was established, specifically to monitor for signs of stalking or unusual activity. The psychological impact on Margaret Holloway was severe. Though she physically recovered from her ordeal, she never returned to living alone. She moved to an assisted living facility in Burlington, unable to shake the feeling of being watched that Walsh's surveillance had instilled in her. She died 2 years later, and her family attributed her decline to the trauma of her captivity. For Sheriff Cross, the case fundamentally changed her approach to community policing. She implemented new protocols for welfare checks, required documentation of all service personnel working in elderly residents' homes, and established regular check-in systems for isolated community members. Most importantly, she learned that evil could hide behind the most mundane facades, that a helpful handyman could spend years building an elaborate predator network right under everyone's noses. The abandoned tunnel system has become something of a local legend in Millfield County. Despite being sealed and filled, residents still report feeling uneasy about their basement and ground-level rooms. Cross retired in 2023, but she still receives calls from community members who think they hear scratching sounds in their walls or feel like they're being watched. Most of these calls turn out to be nothing, but Cross always responds personally, understanding that the fear Walsh instilled in the community runs deeper than any physical tunnels he dug. The case serves as a reminder that predators often hide in plain sight, using their legitimate access to positions of trust to facilitate their crimes. It also demonstrates how technology can be weaponized by those with malicious intent, turning everyday surveillance tools into instruments of terror. For the residents of Millfield County, the night shift will never feel quite as safe again. Sheriff Michael Brody had been looking forward to his retirement after 32 years in law enforcement. At 58, he'd seen enough crime and tragedy to last several lifetimes, and the quiet mountain town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, had provided a peaceful end to his career. With just 3 months left before his pension kicked in, Brody was planning to spend his days fishing and hiking, leaving the badge behind forever. But the case that began on November 8, 2021, would ensure that Sheriff Michael Brody's final investigation would be his most disturbing, and that retirement would bring anything but peace. The missing person report came in from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychiatrist who ran a private practice in town. Her patient, 28-year-old Emma Patterson, had failed to show up for 3 consecutive appointments, highly unusual for someone Dr. Walsh described as obsessively punctual due to severe anxiety disorders. Emma lived alone in a small apartment above, the town's vintage bookstore, and had no close family or friends who might know her whereabouts. Brody's initial investigation revealed little. Emma's apartment was locked, her car was in its assigned parking space, and nothing appeared disturbed. Her employer at the local library reported she'd called in sick on Monday, but hadn't been heard from since. Most concerning was that Emma's medication for severe panic disorder was still in her apartment. If she'd left voluntarily, she would have taken it with her. The breakthrough came when Brody interviewed Dr. Walsh more thoroughly about Emma's mental state. She'd been making remarkable progress, Dr. Walsh explained. For the first time in years, she was talking about expanding her social circle, maybe even dating. But about 3 weeks ago, she became convinced someone was following her. Did she report it to anyone? Brody asked. She was too embarrassed. Emma had spent years dealing with paranoid thoughts as part of her anxiety disorder. She was afraid that people would think she was having another episode, but this felt different to her, more real. She started taking different routes to work, checking her locks multiple times, even installed a security camera at her apartment door. Brody's interest peaked. A security camera. Did you check the footage? Dr. Walsh looked uncomfortable. That's the strange part. When I suggested she review the footage to either confirm or dismiss her fears, she said the camera had malfunctioned. The memory card was completely blank, as if it had been wiped clean. That afternoon, Brody examined Emma's security camera himself. The device was intact and functional, but as Dr. Walsh said, the memory card contained no data despite being in use for 3 weeks. More troubling, the camera had been repositioned slightly. Instead of covering the hallway approach to Emma's door, it now pointed at a blank wall. Canvassing the neighborhood, Brody found Mrs. Adelaide Crane, an 74-year-old widow, who lived across the street and spent most of her time watching the world from her front window. "Oh yes, I saw someone around Emma's place several times," she told. "Him. Always late at night, usually around 2 or 3 in a.m. Never got a good look at the face, but it was definitely a man. Tall, wearing dark clothes. He seemed to know exactly when to come, like he was watching her schedule." "Did you ever see him approach the building?" Brody asked. "That's the odd thing. I'd see him on the street, but then I'd look away for a moment. And when I looked back, he'd be gone, like he just vanished. But Emma's security light would be on, so I knew someone had been near her door." Brody began to piece together a pattern of stalking behavior, but with Emma missing and no physical evidence, he had little to go on. The case took a dramatic turn when he received a call from the Cedar Ridge Public Library, where Emma worked. "Sheriff, you need to get down here," the head librarian, Martha Stevens, said urgently. "We found something in Emma's work area that, well, you need to see it." At the library, Brody was led to Emma's desk in the reference section. Hidden in the bottom drawer, wrapped in library book covers, was a manila envelope containing dozens of photographs. The images showed Emma going about her daily life, leaving her apartment, walking to work, grocery shopping, even sleeping in her bed taken through her bedroom window. The photos spanned at least 2 months and were taken with a telephoto lens from various concealed positions. "There's more," Martha said, her voice shaking. "Look at this." She handed Brody a book that had been hollowed out to create a hiding space. Inside was a handwritten note. "Sheriff Brody, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. The man following me is real, and I think he's escalating. I've been documenting everything I can remember and hiding it here because I'm afraid. He's been in my apartment. Check the old Riverside Mill. I followed him there 2 nights ago and saw lights in the basement level. Don't go alone, Emma." The Riverside Mill was an abandoned textile factory that had closed 15 years earlier. Located 2 mi outside town along Beaver Creek, it had become a popular spot for teenage parties and urban exploration. Brody had cleared trespassers from the property dozens of times over the years, but had never noticed any signs of regular habitation. Following protocol, Brody called for backup before heading to the mill. Deputies Carson and Lou met him at the site, and together they approached the massive brick building. The main entrance was chained shut, but they found a side door that had been forced open. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt suggested recent activity. Inside the mill was a maze of empty rooms connected by corridors filled with abandoned machinery. The basement level was accessed by a concrete staircase that descended into darkness. As they made their way down, Brody noticed that while the upper floors were covered in dust and debris, the basement showed signs of regular cleaning and maintenance. The basement had been divided into several rooms during the mill's operational years, and most were empty. But at the far end of the building, they found a room that had been converted into what could only be described as a shrine to obsession. The walls were covered with hundreds of photographs, not just of Emma Patterson, but of at least a dozen other young women. Some photos appeared to be years old, others were recent. "Jesus," Deputy Carson whispered. "How long has this been going on?" The room contained detailed files on each woman, including personal information, daily schedules, psychological profiles, and in some cases, what appeared to be medical records. A large map on one wall showed the locations where each woman lived, worked, and spent time, connected by colored strings like a conspiracy theorist's board. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of video monitors connected to hidden cameras. The feeds showed live surveillance of multiple locations around Cedar Ridge, apartment buildings, the library, Dr. Walsh's office, even the sheriff's department. Someone had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of the entire town. Sheriff Deputy Liu called from an adjoining room. "You need to see this." The next room had been set up as a medical facility of sorts, complete with an examination table, medical equipment, and restraints. Filing cabinets contained detailed medical records for each of the stalked women, including information that could only have been obtained by someone with access to confidential medical files. In the center of the room was a computer workstation displaying what appeared to be a database. The files contained not just surveillance information, but psychological. Each woman had been isolated, vulnerable, and had minimal social connections that would trigger extensive searches. As they documented the evidence, Brody's radio crackled with an incoming call. "Sheriff, this is dispatch. We have a situation. A woman matching Emma Patterson's description has been spotted at the abandoned Anderson farm, appearing to be in distress. The Anderson farm was 12 miles from the mill, another abandoned property that had been empty since the family moved away a decade ago." Brody faced a critical decision: split his team to respond to the sighting while securing the mill evidence, or risk losing Emma if this was a legitimate rescue opportunity. "Carson, stay here and secure this scene. Don't let anyone near it until state investigators arrive. Lou, you're with me." The drive to the Anderson farm took 20 minutes on winding mountain roads. As they approached the property, Brody could see lights in the farmhouse windows, the first sign of activity there in years. A car was parked behind the house, hidden from the main road. Approaching cautiously, they could hear voices from inside. The house, a man speaking calmly and a woman crying. Brody positioned Deputy Liu at the back entrance while he approached the front door. Through a window, he could see Emma Patterson tied to a chair in what had been the farmhouse's living room. A man in medical scrubs was preparing what appeared to be an injection. "Police, don't move!" Brody shouted as he burst through the front door. The man spun around, and Brody got his first clear look at the suspect. It was Dr. Harrison Pierce, a physician who had served the Cedar Ridge community for over 15 years. Pierce was well respected, trusted by residents, and had unlimited access to medical records and controlled substances. "Sheriff Brody," Pierce said calmly, still holding the syringe. "You're earlier than my calculations predicted. Emma and I were just discussing her treatment plan." "Step away from her, Doc. Put down the syringe and put your hands where I can see them." Pierce smiled with an expression that chilled Brody to the bone. "You don't understand, Sheriff. These women need help. They're damaged, broken by society's pressures and expectations. I provide them with peace, with purpose. Emma will be much happier once her treatment is complete." Emma looked up at Brody with terrified eyes. She was conscious but appeared drugged, struggling against her restraints. "He's been keeping me sedated," she managed to whisper. "There are others." Basement. The mention of others in the basement made Brody's blood run cold. "Where are they, Pierce?" "How many others?" "7 beautiful souls all at peace now," Pierce replied. "Emma will be the 8th. My collection will be complete, and then I can begin the real work." Deputy Lau appeared, behind Pierce, gun drawn. "Drop the weapon, Doctor." Pierce looked between the two officers, and seemed to calculate his options. "You can't stop the treatment," he said. "These women chose this. They came to me seeking help for their pain, their anxiety, their depression. I simply provided a permanent solution." "By murdering them," Brody stated. "By freeing them," Pice corrected, "from the prison of their own minds, from a society that would never accept them as they were." Look at Emma. She was terrified of her own shadow, convinced the world was conspiring against her. "I gave her something real to fear, and then I took that fear away forever." The standoff ended when Pierce suddenly lunged toward Emma with the syringe. Brody fired twice, hitting Pierce in the chest. The doctor collapsed, the syringe rolling across the floor. As Deputy Liu secured the scene and called for emergency medical services, Brody freed Emma from her restraints. The search of the Anderson farm basement revealed the full horror of Pierce's crimes. 7 women, ranging in age from 22 to 34, had been preserved in a makeshift morgue Pierce had constructed. Each had been embellished and arranged in peaceful poses, dressed in white gowns, like sleeping angels. Personal effects and detailed journals documented how Pierce had stalked, abducted, and killed each woman, while maintaining his respected position in the community. Investigation revealed that Pice had been using his medical practice to identify vulnerable patients, then systematically stalking them to determine the best candidates for his collection. He had access to psychiatric records, medication histories, and personal information that allowed him to target women who would be less likely to be immediately missed. The surveillance equipment at the mill was connected to cameras Pice had installed throughout Cedar Ridge over a period of years. He had been watching the entire community, studying patterns and behaviors, identifying potential victims while maintaining his facade as a caring physician. Emma Patterson survived her ordeal, but required extensive psychological treatment to recover from the trauma. She eventually moved away from Cedar Ridge, unable to feel safe in a place where she had been hunted like prey. The other families, affected by Pierce's crimes, struggled to understand how a trusted doctor had turned their community into his hunting ground. Sheriff Brody's retirement was delayed by months as he worked with state and federal investigators to uncover the full scope of Pierce's crimes. The case garnered national attention as one of the most elaborate stalking and murder operations ever discovered in a small American town. Dr. Harrison Pierce died from his gunshot wounds before he could stand trial, taking many secrets about his methods and motivations to the grave. Investigation of his personal effects revealed detailed journals dating back over a decade, documenting his gradual transformation from a physician who genuinely wanted to help people to a predator who saw vulnerable women as objects to be collected and preserved. The case led to significant changes in how medical privacy laws are balanced against public safety concerns. Pierce had exploited his access to confidential patient information to identify and target victims, highlighting vulnerabilities in the healthcare system that had never been adequately addressed. For the residents of Cedar Ridge, the revelation that their trusted family doctor had been a calculating killer shattered their sense of community safety. Property values declined as families moved away, and the town struggled to attract new medical professionals willing to work in a place associated with such horror. Sheriff Brody finally retired in 2022, but the Pierce case haunted him throughout his remaining years. He died in 2024, and his widow later revealed that he had spent his retirement investigating cold cases, wondering how many other Dr. Pierces might be hiding in plain sight in small communities across America. The Anderson Farm and Riverside Mill were both demolished by the county, their foundations filled with concrete and the land designated as memorial parks. But the surveillance equipment Pice had installed throughout Cedar Ridge was never completely removed. And some residents still report feeling watched when they walked the streets where he once hunted. Emma Patterson's note, hidden in the library book, became evidence that saved not only her own life, but helped expose one of the most chilling predator operations in Colorado history. Her courage in documenting her fears, despite her mental health struggles, proved that sometimes paranoia isn't paranoia at all. Sometimes it's survival instinct recognizing a very real threat. Sheriff Daniel Murphy had always prided himself on being a man of science and logic. During his 19 years serving Oakdale County, Montana, he'd solved cases through methodical investigation evidence analysis, and good old-fashioned police work. At 44, he was respected throughout the rural community for his rational approach to law enforcement and his ability to separate fact from fiction. Those qualities would be severely tested during the 3 weeks in August 2022 that would become known locally as the Frequency Incident, a case that challenged every assumption Murphy had about reality itself. It began with what seemed like a routine equipment malfunction. On August 7th, the department's radio system started experiencing severe interference during the overnight shift. Deputy Sarah Chen reported that between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., normal radio communication became impossible due to a high-pitched tone that made the speakers virtually unusable. The department's IT contractor, Mike Rodriguez, was called in to investigate. "I've never seen anything like this," Rodriguez told Murphy the next morning. "The interference isn't coming from outside sources. No weather, no equipment failures, no cell tower issues. It's like the signal is being generated internally, but there's nothing in our system that could produce this type of frequency." The problem worsened over the next few nights. The interference expanded from 2 hours to 4, then 6, until eventually the entire overnight shift was working without reliable radio communication. More disturbing was that the static began to carry what sounded like fragments of human voice. Whatever we're hearing isn't registering on any of our monitoring devices. According to the instruments, our radio system is operating normally. As the night progressed, the voices became clearer. Murphy began to make out individual words. "Help, trapped, sheriff." And most disturbing of all, his own name being repeated over and over. The voices sounded desperate, frightened, as if they were trying to communicate something urgent. At 3:17 a.m., one voice came through clearly enough for Murphy to understand. A complete sentence. "Sheriff Murphy, you have to find us. We're still here. We never left." Murphy felt his blood run cold. The voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Rodriguez, did you hear that? Hear what, Sheriff?" "All I'm getting is the high-pitched tone." Apparently, Murphy was the only one who could understand the voices within the interference. Over the next hour, more messages came through, all addressed specifically to him. "The accident wasn't an accident. Check the quarry again. He's still covering it up. Don't trust him." The references to a quarry made Murphy think immediately of the Morrison Quarry, an abandoned granite operation about 15 miles outside town. 3 years earlier, there had been a tragic accident there involving 4 teenagers who had been swimming in the flooded quarry despite numerous warnings about the dangerous currents and hidden debris. The bodies of Jennifer Hayes, Mark Peterson, Ashley Crane, and David Liu had been recovered after an extensive search operation. Murphy had investigated the incident personally. The teenagers had been drinking, which impaired their judgment about the quarry's dangers. It was ruled an accidental drowning with no evidence of foul play. But now the voices in the radio interference were suggesting otherwise. The next night, August 13th, Murphy brought in additional recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the voices that only he seemed able to hear. At 2 a.m., the interference began again, but this time the voices were more organized, as if they knew he was listening. Sheriff Murphy came the voice of Jennifer Hayes. He was certain it was her now. "We weren't alone at the quarry that night. Someone else was there. Someone who made sure we didn't come back up." "Who?" Murphy asked aloud, feeling ridiculous for speaking to radio static. "Coach Bradley," came the reply. "He followed us there. He was angry about the game, about losing the championship. He blamed us." Murphy's heart pounded. Coach Terry Bradley had been the high school football coach at the time of the quarry incident. He'd left town shortly after the teenagers' deaths, citing grief over losing students he taught. But Jennifer's words suggested a much darker motive. "He held us under." Another voice joined in. "Mark Peterson. One by one made it look like accidents. We tried to fight, but he was too strong." "There's evidence," Ashley Crane's voice added. "In his truck, he kept something. Check the old Hartman property where he's been staying." Murphy knew the Hartman property, a remote ranch that had been abandoned for years, but recently had shown signs of occasional habitation. Local kids reported seeing lights there at night, and Murphy had made a mental note to investigate when he had time. The voices continued through the night, providing details about the night at the quarry that had never been part of the official investigation. They described Coach Bradley arriving drunk and enraged about the football team's recent loss in the A state championship game, a loss he blamed on the partying and undisciplined behavior of his star players. The teenagers had been easy targets, isolated at the quarry with no one around to witness what happened. By dawn, Murphy had pages of notes about what the voices had told him. Logically, he knew he couldn't use supernatural communications as evidence in a criminal investigation, but the details were specific enough that they might point him toward real evidence that could reopen the case if it existed. That afternoon, Murphy drove out to the Hartman property alone. The abandoned ranch house sat in a valley surrounded by dense forest, accessible only by a rough dirt road. As he approached, he could see a pickup truck parked behind the house, a truck that matched the description of the vehicle Coach Bradley had been driving when he left town. Murphy called for backup before approaching the house, but as he waited, he decided to examine the truck. The vehicle was unlocked, and in the glove compartment, he found registration papers confirming it belonged to Terry Bradley. More importantly, in a toolbox in the truck bed, he discovered a waterproof bag containing 4 driver's licenses, those belonging to Jennifer Hayes, Mark Peterson, Ashley Crane, and David Liu. The implications were staggering. If Bradley had kept the licenses as trophies, it suggested the deaths weren't accidental but deliberate murder. Murphy immediately secured the scene and called for state investigators. Knowing this evidence could potentially reopen the quarry case, when backup arrived, they searched the property and found Bradley inside the ranch house, apparently living there since leaving town 3 years earlier. He'd been working odd jobs and staying off the grid, returning periodically to the property he didn't own. When confronted with the driver's licenses, Bradley initially denied any involvement in the teenagers' deaths. But as the interrogation continued, his story began to change. He admitted to being at the quarry that night, claiming he'd gone there to confront the teenagers about their behavior and its impact on the team's performance. According to Bradley, the confrontation had escalated, but he maintained their deaths were still accidental. They were drunk and stupid, Bradley told investigators. I was trying to teach them a lesson about responsibility when they jumped in the water. I didn't stop them, maybe I should have, but I was angry. I watched them struggle and I didn't help. That's not murder. That's just not saving someone. But the evidence suggested a more active role. Forensic examination of the driver's licenses revealed Bradley's fingerprints, and further investigation of the quarry site using new diving equipment revealed additional evidence that had been missed in the original search. Hidden among the debris at the bottom of the quarry, investigators found a weighted bag containing the teenagers' cell phones and car keys, items that should have been on their bodies or in their clothes if they had simply jumped into the water. The cell phone data revealed the teenagers had been texting frantically in the minutes before their deaths, with messages indicating someone was threatening them. The last text sent from Jennifer's phone read, "Coach here, angry help," before the signal cut off. Bradley eventually confessed to a more active role in the deaths, admitting that he had physically prevented the teenagers from leaving the water when they tried to swim to safety. His motive was revenge for what he saw as their disrespectful behavior that had cost the team its championship hopes. He had followed them to the quarry, intending only to confront them, but his anger had escalated into homicidal rage. The question that haunted Murphy throughout the investigation was how the victims' voices had communicated with him through the radio interference. The phenomenon continued for several more nights, with the voices thanking him for finding the truth and bringing their killer to justice. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the interference stopped. The radio system returned to normal operation, and Murphy never heard the voices again. Scientific analysis of the radio equipment revealed Murphy retired in 2024, but he kept his old radio equipment, occasionally tuning in to the frequency where he'd heard the voices. Though he never heard them again, he sometimes wondered if other unsolved cases might have victims trying to communicate from beyond death. Desperate for justice that only the living could provide, the frequency incident taught him that truth could come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes the dead refuse to rest until their stories are heard. Sheriff Elizabeth Hawkins had built her reputation on being unshakable. During her 16 years serving Millbrook County, Maine, she'd handled everything from domestic violence cases to drug trafficking operations with a steady hand and analytical mind. At 42, she was one of the youngest sheriffs in the state's history, and her solve rate was among the highest. But the case that began on a fog-shrouded morning in October 2023 would test every assumption she'd ever made about reality, identity, and the nature of evil itself. The first call came in at 6:23 a.m. from the Millbrook General Hospital emergency room. Dr. Patricia Vance, the attending physician, sounded shaken when she contacted the sheriff's department. "We need law enforcement here immediately," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "We have a patient who claims to be Sheriff Elizabeth Hawkins, and she's showing identification to prove it. The problem is, she's covered in blood that isn't hers, and she keeps insisting that someone has stolen her life." Hawkins was at home getting ready for work when the call came through dispatch. She felt a chill run down her spine as Deputy Rodriguez relayed the message. How could someone be impersonating her at the hospital when she was standing in her own bedroom? "Tell Dr. Vance." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Hawkins instructed, "and Rodriguez, don't let anyone leave or enter that room until I arrive." The drive to Millbrook General took her through the town's historic district, past the colonial houses and centuries-old cemetery that gave the area its distinctive New England character. A thick fog had rolled in from the Atlantic during the night, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards and creating an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed to press against her patrol car windows like ghostly fingers. At the hospital, Dr. Vance met Hawkins in the corridor outside the emergency room. "Sheriff, I have to ask, have you been in any kind of accident this morning? Any situation where you might have injured yourself or been exposed to someone else's blood?" "No," Hawkins replied firmly. "I was at home until 20 minutes ago." "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Dr. Vance looked uncomfortable. "The woman in room 3 is an exact physical match for you, Sheriff. Same height, same weight, same scars, including that distinctive mark on your left hand from the fishing accident when you were 12. She knows details about your life that only you should know, but she's covered in what appears to be human blood, and she's in an extreme state of agitation." Hawkins felt her world tilt slightly. The scar on her left hand was from a childhood accident that few people knew about. She'd caught a fishing hook in the webbing between her thumb and index finger during a trip with her father. How could an imposter know such an obscure detail? "I need to see her," Hawkins said. "Sheriff, I have to warn you. She becomes extremely agitated when anyone suggests she's not who she claims to be. She's been asking for a mirror constantly, but we haven't provided one because her reaction to reflective surfaces has been disturbing." Dr. Vance led Hawkins to room 3, where a security guard stood outside the door. Through the small window, Hawkins could see a figure sitting on the examination table with her back turned. The woman was wearing what appeared to be a sheriff's uniform, identical to Hawkins's own, complete with the same badge number and name tag. "Ma'am," Hawkins called through the door. "This is Sheriff Hawkins. I need to speak with you." The figure on the table went rigid, then slowly turned around. Hawkins felt as if she was looking into a mirror. The woman had her exact face, her hair, even the small birthmark near her left ear that was usually hidden by her hair. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They held a wild, desperate quality that Hawkins had never seen in her own reflection. "No," the woman said. Her voice carrying Hawkins' own vocal patterns and inflections. "You're the imposter. I'm Sheriff Elizabeth Hawkins. I don't know what kind of sick game this is, but I demand to see a mirror right now." Hawkins entered the room slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. The blood on the woman's uniform was extensive, covering the front of her shirt and both hands. "Hey, ma'am, I need you to remain calm while we sort this out. Can you tell me your name? I told you. I'm Elizabeth Hawkins, Sheriff of Millbrook County, badge number 147. I've been serving this community for 16 years. I graduated from the University of Maine in 2005, joined the Portland Police Department, then transferred here in 2007. My father was James Hawkins, retired lobster fisherman. My mother was Sarah Hawkins, who died of cancer in 2019. Every detail was correct. Hawkins felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. Where did the blood come from? The woman's expression became confused and frightened. I don't remember. I woke up in the woods behind my house covered in this blood, but when I tried to go inside, someone else was there. Someone who looked exactly like me was having breakfast in my kitchen, reading my newspaper, living my life. That's impossible, Hawkins said, though her voice lacked conviction. Is it? The woman demanded. Then explain this. She held up her left hand, showing the fishing hook scar that matched Hawkins's own perfectly. Explain how I know that you keep a photograph of your father's boat in your desk drawer at the station. Explain how I know that you have a recurring nightmare about drowning that started after your mother's death. Hawkins had never told anyone about that nightmare. It was too personal, too raw. The detail about her father's photograph was also accurate. It was something she kept private, a small memento in the bottom drawer of her desk that few people would ever notice. Dr. Vance stepped forward. Sheriff, we've run preliminary blood tests on the sample from her uniform. It's human. Blood type O negative, but it's not hers. Her blood type is a positive, same as yours according to your medical records. I need to make some calls, Hawkins said, backing toward the door. Don't let her leave this room. Outside in the corridor, Hawkins called Deputy Rodriguez. I need you to go to my house immediately and secure the scene. Look for any signs of disturbance, blood, or evidence of a struggle. And Rodriguez approached with extreme caution. While waiting for Rodriguez's report, Hawkins tried to process what she was experiencing. The woman in the hospital room was either an incredibly sophisticated imposter who had somehow obtained the most intimate details of her life, or something far more disturbing was happening. The blood evidence suggested violence, but whose blood was it? And how had it gotten on the woman's uniform? Rodriguez called back within 30 minutes. Sheriff, I'm at your house now. The front door was standing open, and there's evidence of a struggle in the kitchen. I found blood on the floor. Not a lot, but enough to suggest someone was injured. And Sheriff, there's something else. I found another sheriff's uniform in your bedroom, identical to the one you're wearing, but it's torn and bloody. Hawkins felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Any sign of forced entry? That's the strange part. No broken windows, no damaged locks. It's like whoever was here had a key or was let in by someone they trusted. I'm coming home now. Secure the scene and don't let anyone else inside. The drive back to her house took Hawkins through the same fog-shrouded streets, but everything felt different now. The familiar landmarks seemed distorted, as if she was seeing them through someone else's eyes. When she arrived at her property, a modest two-story house she'd owned for 8 years, she saw Rodriguez's patrol car in the driveway and crime scene tape across the front door. Show me what you found, Hawkins instructed. Rodriguez led her through the house, pointing out the evidence he'd documented in the kitchen. Droplets of blood formed a trail from the breakfast table to the back door. The morning newspaper was still folded beside a half-finished cup of coffee, as if someone had been interrupted during a normal morning routine. In the bedroom, the bloody uniform Rodriguez had mentioned was laid out on the bed. It was identical to Hawkins's own in every detail, down to the specific wear patterns and small stains she recognized from years of use. But the fabric was torn in several places, and the blood stains suggested significant trauma. Sheriff, Rodriguez said carefully, I have to ask, is there any possibility you have a twin sister? Someone who might have access to your personal information and could obtain a uniform? I'm an only child, Hawkins replied. My parents never mentioned any siblings, and I've seen my birth certificate. There's no twin. But even as she said it, Hawkins realized she was making assumptions about things she'd never actually verified. How well did she really know her own family history? Her parents had been private people, and there were aspects of their past they'd never discussed in detail. The investigation took a surreal turn when Hawkins decided to confront the woman at the hospital again, this time bringing evidence from the house. When she returned to room 3, she found Dr. Vance in animated discussion with the patient. Sheriff, Dr. Vance said when she arrived. "She's been providing details about cases you've worked on, details that aren't in any public records." She described evidence from the Henderson murder case that was never released to the media. The Henderson case had been one of Hawkins's most challenging investigations 2 years earlier. The specific details the woman was providing were known only to her, the crime scene team, and the prosecutors. There was no way an imposter could have access to that information unless they had been directly involved in the investigation. "I need to speak with her alone," Hawkins said. Dr. Vance looked reluctant, but agreed to leave them. When the door closed, Hawkins faced her doppelganger directly. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I need answers. Where did you get the information about my cases?" The woman looked at her with a mixture of desperation and anger. "Because I worked those cases, I lived through every detail, every sleepless night, every breakthrough. I am you, Elizabeth. I don't know what's happening to us, but somehow there are 2 of us now, and only one of us can be real." "That's impossible, is it? Then explain the blood. Explain how I know things about you that no one else could know. Explain how I have every scar, every memory, every experience that makes you who you are." Hawkins studied the woman's face, looking for some indication that she was an imposter. But everything was perfect. Every facial expression, every vocal inflection, even the way she held her shoulders when she was stressed. It was like looking at herself in a mirror, except the reflection was covered in someone else's blood. "Whose blood is it?" Hawkins asked. The woman's expression became troubled. "I've been trying to remember. There are fragments, images of a struggle, someone screaming, the smell of fear, but it's like trying to remember a dream. The harder I focus, the more it slips away." Dr. Vance knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "Sheriff, I need to speak with you immediately. We've gotten the preliminary results back from the blood analysis." Outside the room, Dr. Vance showed Hawkins a laboratory report. "The blood on her uniform contains DNA markers that are unusual. The lab technician says it's human blood, but the genetic structure doesn't match anything in the databases. It's as if the blood came from someone who was human, but genetically distinct in ways that shouldn't be possible." "What does that mean?" "Honestly, Sheriff, I don't know. The lab wants to run additional tests, but they're requesting samples from both you and the patient for comparison." Hawkins agreed to provide blood samples, though she wasn't sure what the results would prove. As the nurse drew her blood, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing some invisible line, opening a door that might be better left closed. The next development came from an unexpected source. While they waited for the genetic analysis, "Results," Deputy Martinez called from the station with disturbing news. "Sheriff, we've been going through missing persons reports from the past week, and we found something strange. 3 people have been reported missing from neighboring counties. All law enforcement officers all disappeared without a trace." "What kind of officers?" "A state trooper from York County, a detective from Cumberland County, and a deputy from Oxford County. All experienced officers, all disappeared from their homes without any signs of struggle. And Sheriff, all 3 were found this morning in remote locations, disoriented and covered in blood that wasn't theirs." Hawkins felt a chill deeper than any Maine winter. "Are you saying this isn't an isolated incident?" "It gets worse. Each of the officers claims that someone else has taken over their identity and is living their life. They're all being held for psychological evaluation because their stories are considered too bizarre to be credible." The implications were staggering. If this was happening to law enforcement officers across multiple counties, it suggested something far more sinister than a simple case of mistaken identity or psychological breakdown. Someone or something was systematically targeting police officers, creating duplicates and displacing the originals. Hawkins returned to the hospital to confront the woman who claimed to be her. "I need you to think carefully about what happened to you. Other officers across the state are experiencing the same thing, waking up disoriented and bloody, while someone else has taken over their lives. This is bigger than just us." The woman's eyes widened with recognition. "The dreams," she whispered. "I've been having dreams about a place underground with bright lights and people in white coats. They were doing something to me, something that hurt. What kind of place? I don't know, but I remember the smell. Antiseptic like a hospital, but wrong somehow. And there were others there, other people who looked confused and frightened. Dr. Vance, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Sheriff, there's something I need to tell you. About 5 years ago, there were rumors in the medical community about a research facility that had been conducting unauthorized experiments. The facility was supposedly investigating genetic duplication and memory transfer, science fiction stuff that most of us dismissed as impossible. Where was this facility? That's the problem. No one knew for certain. It was all rumors and speculation, but the story suggested it was somewhere in rural Maine, hidden and operating without any regulatory oversight. Hawkins felt pieces of a horrifying puzzle beginning to come together. Dr. Vance, I need you to contact the other hospitals where the missing officers were found, get their blood work, and compare it to what we found here. If this is connected to some kind of illegal research, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Over the next 48 hours, a terrifying pattern emerged. All 4 displaced officers had identical anomalies in their blood work, genetic markers that suggested they had been subjects of sophisticated biological manipulation. More disturbing was the discovery that each officer's replacement was living their normal life, with no one apparently noticing the substitution. The breakthrough came when the woman at the hospital suddenly remembered a crucial detail. "The license plate," she said urgently. "I remember seeing a license plate when they transported me. It had the letters BDL and numbers I can't quite recall." Deputy Rodriguez ran the partial plate through the state database and found a match, a research vehicle registered to Biotech Development Labs, a company that had been dissolved 3 years earlier, but apparently still maintained some kind of operation. The registered address led to a facility in the remote Allagash wilderness, over 200 miles from Millbrook County. Hawkins assembled a team that included state police investigators and federal agents from the FBI's Biocrimes Unit. The facility they discovered hidden deep in the Maine woods was a fully operational laboratory disguised as an abandoned lumber mill. Inside, they found evidence of horrific experiments involving genetic manipulation, memory implantation, and what could only be described as human duplication. The laboratory contained dozens of holding cells where subjects had been kept during the duplication process. Computer files revealed that the operation had been ongoing for over 5 years, targeting law enforcement officers specifically because their positions provided cover for the duplicates to operate without suspicion. The duplicates themselves were not perfect copies. These were people who had been used in failed experiments or whose duplicates had been deemed unsatisfactory. The originals were killed once their replacements were deemed stable enough to maintain their cover. Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead researcher, was found dead in his laboratory office, apparently having committed suicide when he realized the facility was about to be discovered. His final notes revealed the true scope of the operation: a plan to replace key law enforcement officials across multiple states with controllable duplicates who would protect certain criminal enterprises and ignore specific types of illegal activity. The woman at the hospital, the real Elizabeth Hawkins, was one of only 4 subjects who had escaped before the duplication process was complete. Her memories were intact, but the trauma of the experience had created temporary amnesia about her captivity. The blood on her uniform came from another subject who had tried to escape with her, but didn't survive the attempt. The duplicate living, Hawkins's life was captured at her home and found to be a sophisticated biological construct with implanted memories, but no real consciousness or independent will. It was designed to perform basic law enforcement functions while being remotely controlled for specific operations. The investigation revealed that over 60 law enforcement officers across New England had been replaced over the past 5 years. Some of the duplicates had been in place for years, quietly corrupting investigations and protecting criminal networks that had been funding the research. The real officers who were still alive were recovered from various holding facilities, but many had suffered severe psychological trauma from their experiences. Some, like Hawkins, were able to return to their lives, but others were too damaged by the ordeal to resume their careers. Sheriff Elizabeth Hawkins eventually returned to duty after extensive psychological evaluation and medical treatment. but the experience fundamentally changed her understanding of identity and reality. The knowledge that someone had been living her life, sleeping in her bed and performing her job while she was held captive in a laboratory, created a sense of violation that no amount of therapy could completely heal. The biotech conspiracy became one of the largest federal investigations in Maine's history, leading to arrests across multiple states and exposing corruption in law enforcement agencies that had been infiltrated by the duplicates. The case raised questions about the nature of identity and consciousness that scientists and philosophers continued to debate. Hawkins kept the bloody uniform she had worn during her escape as a reminder of how close she had come to being permanently replaced. Every morning when she looked in the mirror, she wondered if the reflection she saw was truly her own, or if somewhere in some hidden laboratory, another version of herself was being created for purposes she couldn't imagine. The Biotech Development Labs case taught law enforcement agencies across the country about vulnerabilities they had never considered. The possibility that officers could be replaced so seamlessly that colleagues, friends, and even family members might never notice the substitution. New protocols were established for verifying officer identities and detecting signs of the biological markers that indicated artificial construction. But for Hawkins, the most disturbing aspect wasn't the technology or the conspiracy. It was the realization that for months, a thing that looked exactly like her had been living her life, and no one had noticed the difference. It raised questions about the nature of identity itself. What makes a person real? Is it memories, experiences, or something more fundamental that can't be replicated in a laboratory? She retired early in 2025, unable to fully trust her own perceptions or feel secure in her own identity. But she continued to work as a consultant on cases involving identity fraud and human trafficking, driven by the knowledge that other victims might still be out there, trapped in laboratories, waiting for someone to notice that their reflections had been stolen. Music. Sheriff Rebecca Chen had always found comfort in the dense forests of Olympic County, Washington. During her 11 years serving the rural community nestled between ancient cedar groves and mist-covered mountains, she'd come to know every trail, every clearing, and every hidden creek that wound through the 900 square miles of wilderness under her jurisdiction. The forests had been her sanctuary until the morning of March 15, 2024, when they became something far more sinister. What began as a routine search and rescue call would evolve into a nightmare that challenged everything Chen believed about predator and prey, forcing her to confront the possibility that something ancient and malevolent had been watching the people of Olympic County for far longer than anyone could imagine. The emergency call came in at 5:47 a.m. from the Cascade Campground, a popular spot for hikers and families located deep in the Olympic National Forest. The caller was Dr. James Harrison, a pediatrician from Seattle who had been camping with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. His voice was barely controlled panic as he explained to dispatch that Emma had vanished from their tent sometime during the night. "She was sleeping right next to me," Harrison told Chen when she arrived at the campsite 40 minutes later. "I'm a light sleeper. I would have heard if she got up to use the bathroom or if anyone had approached our tent. But when I woke up this morning, she was just gone. Her sleeping bag was still zipped up like she had never been there at all." Chen examined the campsite carefully. The tent showed no signs of forced entry or disturbance. Emma's belongings were exactly where they should be. Her shoes lined up neatly by the tent entrance, her jacket hanging on a camp chair, even her favorite stuffed animal still tucked into her sleeping bag. Most puzzling was that there were no footprints leading away from the tent, despite the soft earth around the campsite that should have clearly shown any movement. "Dr. Harrison, I need you to think carefully," Chen said. "Is there any possibility Emma might have wandered off on her own? Maybe she was confused or disoriented when she woke up." "Absolutely not," Harrison replied firmly. "Emma has never sleepwalked, and she's terrified of the dark. She wouldn't leave the tent without waking me first. Something took her, Sheriff. I know how that sounds, but something took my daughter." Chen called for additional search teams while she began a preliminary investigation of the surrounding area. The Cascade Campground was isolated, accessible only by a narrow Forest Service road that wound through miles of dense woodland. The nearest neighbors were other campers, and the closest town was over 20 miles away. As she expanded her search radius around the campsite, Chen found something that made her stop in her tracks. About 50 yards into the forest, carved into the bark of an ancient cedar tree, was a symbol she'd never seen before. A series of interconnected circles and lines that appeared to have been freshly cut into the wood. The carving was precise, deliberate, and positioned at exactly eye level for an adult. "Dispatch, I need you to contact the Park Service and get me information about any similar markings found in the area," Chen radioed. "Also, check with neighboring counties for any missing children cases with unusual circumstances." The search teams arrived within 2 hours. Volunteers from the local fire department, park rangers, and search and rescue specialists with trained dogs. Chen briefed them on the situation while trying to maintain hope that Emma had simply wandered off and would be found safe. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Vance, the county medical examiner, called Chen's radio around 400 p.m. with urgent information. "Sheriff, I've been researching those symbols you found. I contacted a colleague at the University of Washington who specializes in Pacific Northwest indigenous cultures. He says the markings match descriptions of symbols used by a group that was supposed to have disappeared over a century ago." "What kind of group?" That's where it gets strange. According to the historical records, there were stories among several local tribes about a group they called the Watchers, people who lived deep in the forest and were said to take children for ritual purposes. The tribes considered them so dangerous that even mentioning them was taboo. Chen felt a chill despite the warm afternoon air. "Are we talking about some kind of cult?" The professor thinks it might be descendants of a cult that was driven into hiding in the 1890s. There are fragmentary reports from early settlers about children disappearing and strange symbols being found carved into trees. But, Sheriff, here's the disturbing part. He says there have been sporadic reports of similar disappearances every few decades since then. Always in remote forest areas, always involving children between the ages of 7 and 10. That evening, Chen made the difficult decision to expand the search into areas of the forest that were normally off-limits to the public. The Olympic National Forest contained vast sections of wilderness that had never been fully mapped or explored, places where even experienced hikers could become lost for days. As darkness fell, Chen found herself leading a small team deeper into the forest than she'd ever ventured before. The ancient trees towered overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight and creating an atmosphere that felt primordial and threatening. Their flashlight beam seemed inadequate against the overwhelming darkness, and every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, seemed amplified and ominous. 2 miles from the main trail, they found another symbol carved into a tree. This, one more elaborate than the first. Below it, scratched into the soft earth, were what appeared to be child-sized footprints leading deeper into the forest. But the prints were strange, too perfectly formed, as if they had been deliberately created rather than naturally made by a walking child. Sheriff whispered Deputy Martinez, who had volunteered for the night search team. "Do you hear that?" Chen listened carefully and realized she could hear something that raised the hair on her arms, a low humming sound, almost like a lullaby coming from somewhere ahead of them in the darkness. The sound was barely audible, but it had an unsettling quality that seemed to resonate in her bones. "Stay close," Chen instructed her team. "And everyone, keep your weapons ready." Following the sound, they emerged into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Chen had studied maps of this area extensively, and there was no record of any significant clearing this deep in the forest. The space was roughly circular, about 50 yards across, with a ring of ancient trees forming natural walls. Around the perimeter, in the center of the clearing, stood a structure that defied explanation, a framework of woven branches and moss that rose about 10 feet into the air, shaped vaguely like a cone or primitive shelter. Around its base, dozens of symbols were carved into the ground, forming concentric circles that seemed to pulse with meaning. Even though Chen couldn't understand what they represented, the humming sound was coming from inside the structure. "Hello," Chen called out, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "This is Sheriff Chen. Is anyone in there? We're here to help." The humming stopped immediately, replaced by a silence, so complete that Chen could hear her own heartbeat. Then slowly a voice emerged from within the structure, a child's voice, weak and frightened. "Help me," the voice whispered. "Please help me, I want to go home." It was Emma Harrison. Chen signaled for her team to surround the structure while she approached the entrance. A gap in the woven branches, just large enough for an adult to crawl through. "Emma, this is Sheriff Chen. Your daddy sent me to find you. I'm going to come in and get you." "Okay, don't," Emma's voice replied, now urgent with fear. "Don't come in. They're sleeping, but they'll wake up if you come too close. You have to go away before they wake up." "Who's sleeping, Emma? Who are they?" "The people who brought me here. They're not like regular people. They're old. Really old. And they smell like the forest. They told me I was going to stay with them forever and help them with something important." Chen felt her blood run cold. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you move? Are you hurt? Are you tied up?" "I'm not tied up, but I can't." "Leave. Every time I try to go near the opening, I get really sleepy and confused. It's like something is making me stay here." Jen turned to Deputy Martinez. "Radio for backup, every available unit, plus medical assistance and additional search teams, and contact Dr. Vance. Tell her we need someone who understands these symbols and what we might be dealing with." As they waited for reinforcements, Chen tried to keep Emma talking while studying the structure more carefully. In the dim light from their flashlights, she could see that the framework was more sophisticated than it had initially appeared. The branches were woven together with what looked like organic fibers, creating a pattern that seemed to shift and move when viewed peripherally. More disturbing were the objects hanging from the interior framework. What appeared to be personal items from children: a small sneaker, a hair ribbon, a toy car. Dozens of items that suggested Emma was not the first child to be held in this place. "Emma, are there other children with you?" Chen asked. "There were," Emma replied, her voice growing faint. "But they went to sleep and didn't wake up. The people said they were helping them become part of the forest forever." The implications of Emma's words hit Chen like a physical blow. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was some kind of ritualistic murder that had been going on for who knew how long. The sleeping children Emma mentioned were almost certainly dead, and Emma herself was in immediate danger. Chen made a tactical decision that went against every protocol she'd ever learned. "Emma, I'm coming in to get you. Whatever happens, stay close to me and don't let go of my hand." "No." Emma's voice was panicked. "You can't. They'll wake up and then they'll keep you too." But Chen was already crawling through the opening in the structure. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside, with a domed ceiling that seemed to extend impossibly high into darkness. Emma was sitting in the center of the space, her eyes wide with terror, but otherwise appearing unharmed. Around the perimeter of the interior, Chen could see shapes that her mind initially refused to process. They appeared to be human figures, but elongated and twisted with limbs that bent at wrong angles and faces that were partially obscured by growths that looked like bark or moss. Some appeared to be sleeping or in some kind of dormant state, while others showed no signs of life at all. "Don't look at them," Emma whispered urgently. "If you look at them too long, you start to hear their voices in your head." Jen grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the entrance, but as they moved, the sleeping figures began to stir. One of them opened eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's, and a sound emerged from its throat. Not quite human, but carrying the cadence of speech. "She belongs to us now," the thing said, its voice like wind through dry leaves. "As do you, intruder. The forest has been waiting for you both." Chen fired 3 shots at the creature, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. If anything, the sound of gunfire only awakened more of the figure, but the creatures were gone. The structure remained, along with the personal effects of dozens of children, spanning what appeared to be several decades. Forensic analysis of the site would eventually identify remains and belongings from over 40 missing children dating back to the 1920s. Most disturbing was the discovery of journals hidden within the structure. Written records kept by the cult members documenting their transformation and their systematic hunting of children over the past century. The journals described how they had adapted to modern times, moving their hunting grounds as development, encroached on their territory, always staying ahead of law enforcement and investigation. The case attracted national attention when DNA analysis of the children's remains revealed connections to missing person cases across multiple states. The Olympic County incident was apparently just one location in a network of sites where the transformed cult members had been operating for decades. Emma Harrison eventually recovered from her physical trauma, but required years of therapy to deal with the psychological effects of her ordeal. She retained fragmented memories of her time with the creatures, including disturbing details about other children who had not been as fortunate as she was. Sheriff Chen worked with federal investigators for months to map the full extent of the cult's activities. They discovered similar clearing sites in remote forest areas across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, a network of ritualistic locations where the transformed cult members had been conducting their child hunting activities for over a century. The investigation raised disturbing questions about how such an operation could continue for so long without detection. The cult members had adapted their methods over the decades, learning to target children from families who were camping or hiking in remote areas where disappearances could be attributed to natural accidents or getting lost in the wilderness. Chen implemented new protocols for search and rescue operations in Olympic County, including specialized training for dealing with cult activities and ritualistic crimes. She also worked with the Park Service to increase surveillance and monitoring of remote camping areas. Though the vast size of the Olympic National Forest made comprehensive coverage nearly impossible, the creatures themselves were never captured or killed. Despite extensive searches by multiple agencies, they seem to have vanished back into the depths of the forest. Occasionally, hikers or campers report seeing strange figures moving through the trees or finding new symbol carvings, but no additional. Children have been reported missing from the Olympic County area. Dr. Kim's research into the historical records revealed that similar cults had existed throughout North America during the late 1800s, often centered around beliefs that combining human sacrifice with natural magic could grant immortality. Most had been destroyed or disbanded by law enforcement, but a few had apparently succeeded in achieving their goals at the cost of becoming something no longer entirely human. For Sheriff Chen, the case fundamentally changed her relationship with the forests she had once loved. The knowledge that ancient predators might still be watching from the shadows of the ancient trees made every call to remote areas a potential encounter with horrors that defied rational explanation. She retired from law enforcement in 2025, but continued to work as a consultant on cases involving cult activities and ritualistic crimes. The Watcher case taught her that some evils were older and more persistent than modern society wanted to acknowledge, and that the wilderness that seemed so peaceful and beautiful on the surface might hide darkness that had been growing for generations. Emma Harrison's rescue became a rare success story in a case file filled with tragedy, but Chen often wondered how many other children over the decades had not been as fortunate. The creatures that called themselves the Eternal Watchers had proven that some predators could evolve and adapt far beyond what law enforcement was trained to handle, and that the line between human and monster was thinner than anyone wanted to believe.